guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another, not a top 10 as such. It's just, this is 10 1970s albums, music albums that have influenced my life and my taste in music and my life. So what do I mean by influencing my life? Because if you're heavily into music and movies, I will do a movie one as well. It shapes your life. It really shapes your life. It does make your life, gives your life the direction it's going to go. Mostly because if you like a certain type of music and stuff, you tend to follow that music and you mix with the people that like that music. You make friends with the people that like that music. You socialize with the people. You even maybe marry. You maybe even pass your taste of music on to your family members. It shapes your life. It's not just a soundtrack to your life. It actually shapes everything about you in a way. And that's the wonderful thing of media, music and movies. I'm into both heavily, so they have influenced my life. So all my friends that I know throughout my life, although, you meet people at work, okay, and you meet people every day and stuff like that, but they don't actually become friends until you have things in common. And that is normal. Some people, it's football, I suppose, and they all follow the same team for years and years and become friends. Now, I'm not a big football fan, but music and movies are where my love and heart lies. So and for my age, 1970s was the era I started to get into music, really, because I was born in the 60s. So I was too young in the 60s. Although a lot of 60s albums I've become love over the years and become a big part of my life. I wanted to focus on my era, my growing up era, say from like about 10 to about sort of 14, 15. Though that part of your life, I think, is what shapes your future. And that's when you come into things like music and movies. That's when you really find your own kind of like identity. Be it football, be it whatever it is, you find your identity. I think between 10 and upwards is when you start thinking for yourself, not just following others, not just following your mum and dad's taste, but following and making your own. So these are 10 1970s albums that have influenced my life, and I think are influential albums because they've influenced my life. So I broke it into two bits. I've got what's this? I've got 5 albums here, I think, from the earlier part of the 70s, and then I've got the latter part. The latter part is probably the one that's more that I got into first. Okay, so the latter part of the 70s, I'm talking sort of 77, 78, 79, that sort of period was when I discovered my own music direction. Over the years, my love and passion for 70s music has grown and grown and grown. So some of the earlier 70s albums are ones that I've grown to love throughout my life. But the latter ones are the ones that probably influenced me in my direction, except one, which is in the early ones. And I'm going to bring it up first, and you know what it is. It's David Bowie, Hunky Dory. This was the first album I purchased on my own. Not the first album I owned, but it's the first album I purchased on my own. I did do a video on David Bowie because I'm celebrating his career this year, and I did bring this album up to you, and this was my favourite David Bowie album, and this was a huge influence on me. It's what got me into music. Before this, I love music. I really did. Love listening to it. Love going down to disco with my family, down the social club, and having a bop to some rock and roll or whatever they would put on. I used to love all that, but this was where I started to occur my own taste, but it was very young. I was really young when I first bought this album. I was about 8 to 9, which you think, my God, Geoff, that is so... Yes, I got into music so young, mostly down to my parents, like I've told you before. They were heavily into music. jazz, um, uh, British rock, and all these wonderful things. So I was lucky to get into music quite early because we had quite a big social life as a family. We went out every Friday night, every Saturday lunchtime, every Saturday night, every Sunday lunchtime. We had a social gathering at our local social club, and like I've explained to you about the jukebox, is when I fell in love with music. And I was really young. I was like about 8, that sort of age. So I had a good understanding what stuff was, and I fell in love with music. And I bought this Bowie album, and that's why it's a really important album to me. It will always remain important to me. Um, it's not the best album. It's not Bowie's best album, but it's my favourite album. Just because when you say it's my favourite album, it doesn't mean it's the best one. It means it's your favourite because there's stories behind it, you know. It doesn't necessarily make it going to be the best album. I think David's done better albums than this, you know. I really love Heathen. I really love Ziggy Stardust. You know, he's done some incredible albums. But this is my favourite one because of the story behind it. It just sort of like gave me identity. I could identify with it, if you know what I mean. I could identify with the music, the words, the image, and everything about him. When I used to come home from school and listen to this, I felt at home. I really did. Another big album that was really important to me back in the day was another alternative artist. David Bowie to me is an alternative artist, and so is this next one, and it's Transformer by Lou Reed. Again, I was a young age when I first heard it. It was about 10 or 11, and I went out and I bought this album, and I got this album when I was a little bit older, but I've heard the songs on it because he's had quite a few hits on this album, and it was really important to me, and I just fell in love with his style because it wasn't too dissimilar from this. And I used to think, it sounds so much like David Bowie. And obviously later on I discovered that this was produced by David Bowie, and that's probably why I really loved this album. But it was a great album, and again it pushed me forward to the alternative side of music. My music was then went into the alternative music scene, not the rock, not the prog, not the folk, or anything like that. I appreciate them as I got older, but when I was young, I went into the alternative music scene, mostly because of these two albums. But my parents, like I said, they had a huge music taste, and of course it rubs off on you. It rubs off on you. So one of the most, I think, important and sort of influential albums to me from my parents' side would be this album, which is Status Quo, Quo Live. Now, my mum had mostly the Quo albums she had were mostly the big hitters, you know, but she did have this one in the collection. I think she got it at a cheap price. I think that's why she bought it. But I used to borrow it, should I say. It did end up in my collection, yeah, but I used to love this album. Wasn't really a massive Quo fan, but this was so different. It was more along the lines of like Thin Lizzy and stuff like that. It was more heavier than their usual sort of pop shenanigans, if you like. And I just thought it was absolutely incredible. Really cool. So yeah, this was probably a part of my mum's side of the family. Because my mum loved Status Quo. She loved Queen, Quo, and ELO. They were her three favourites. She loved things like 10cc and things like that, but she did love the Quo. And so it rubs off on you. It's a part of your history. Your parents' taste will have a little bit of influence somewhere down the line. Like my dad was really heavily into jazz, and when I was young, I could not understand it or get into it. But as I got older, I began to fall in love with jazz, and now I adore and I love jazz just as long with other sort of music genres. But yeah, really cool. So yes, very important to me, and definitely an influential album to my life because I listened to it a lot because my parents did. So I grew up with the Quo, and this to me is their best album, and it's a live album. It's fantastic. We're sticking with live albums for the next one. This is probably the third, I think, yeah, or was it the second or third live album I ever brought, and it's Slade Alive. Really cool album. I fell in love with Slade when I was quite a young age because I was into Bowie, I was into T-Rex, I loved the glam rock thing, I liked the Sweet, and all these sort of bands. I could identify with them more so than your Black Sabbaths and your Deep Purples and that. These were heavy, but these were like fun heavy, if you know what I mean. Do you understand what I mean? Whereas Deep Purple and Black Zeppelin were probably more experimental. These were riff driven, out and out rock songs, and they were just really cool. And of course, Noddy and the boys were on the telly all the time, on Top of the Pops with their hits, Mama We're All Crazy Now and Merry Christmas Everybody, and How Does It Feel? All these wonderful songs. And I fell in love with Slade. This was the first Slade album I brought, and it was a live album. I was really, really into live albums because I used to pretend to be in the band in my bedroom. My sister would tell you this. If there was a tennis racket, that was my guitar. You know, if there was a comb or a hairbrush, that was me mic. I used to be in these bands. So when it was a live concert, I'm not ashamed to say it, you know, I'm sure we all done silly things, but I used to dream of being in a band. And so I was in Slade, I was in Japan, I was in all these crazy bands. Any band that I thought were incredible and sounded amazing, I used to pretend it was me and I was in the band, you know, and before concerts for me, you know, it was me performing my own little concerts in my room. So when we had a live album like this, you know, it was like, wow, I'm in the band. I never did it with David Bowie, which is weird, or Gary. I always looked at them as being too much their own thing. But anything like this, yeah, I was the lead singer and I was in the band. Crazy, right? Things you do when you're really young. But if you're 8, 9, 10, you use your imagination, and it was kind of wonderful, and it made these really special to me. So these two live albums, I'm on them. Oh, that's cool. The last old album that's really influential on me is because of my love of the Beatles. At quite a young age, I really fell for love with the Beatles. They were so different, mostly because of my uncle Dennis. God rest your soul. Most of my family have gone now, guys. There's only me, my sister, and my son left in my family. And he was massive into the Beatles. He gave me records and stuff. And this album, which isn't a Beatles album, it's an album I fell in love with when I first heard it, because it was, well, it's All Things Must Pass by George Harrison from the Beatles. It was just trying to find the words. It was happy, but it was sad at the same time. Songs he was singing were quite mournful and quite about depressing things, but he'd done it in such a peaceful, beautiful way. You could feel the love coming out of the songs, of how he was singing it and the way he was feeling it. You know, I never knew he looked like that. I thought he had a base and bowl haircut, and I always thought, okay, that's really cool that he's gone a different way and he was singing these wonderful songs. I mean, when the Beatles split up, Paul McCartney and Wings went down this sort of experimental sort of prog pop way. John Lennon went his own kind of mad way with Yoko and made some incredible albums. But I took a shine to George after the Beatles. I just found his music more wholesome. I could relate to it more. He sang about being family and love and being at peace with one another and stuff like that. And at that time, I was still quite young, and we used to go to church, and that because we used to go. Me and my sister used to go with my nan, mostly to keep my nan happy. but it did sort of help and cleanse your soul a little bit. It gave you a little bit of respect for people, because the church here kind of taught you to respect one another and be nice and peaceful to one another. And this was kind of a little bit like that. He was singing it in that way with things like My Sweet Lord and all these wonderful tracks. And I just fell in love with this album. But some of the songs were quite downbeat, like this one, All Things Must Pass. It's about dying. Isn't it a pity? Things like that. But it was still just a wonderful album, and it was probably an album that I fell in love with without my parents. My mum and dad quite liked the Beatles. I don't think they ever owned any Beatles records. My mum used to have some John Lennon albums, but I don't think they actually had any Beatles records. I had one Beatles record called Rock and Roll. I don't know if you remember it. It was like almost like a cartoon picture cover, and I used to have that. It's like their really early stuff before they sort of like almost had a contract. Yeah, I had that because it was another cheap like album, like Music for Pleasure or something like that. But I had that, and this I didn't own till later on in life. But I remember the songs of it, and it just made me when I heard these songs like My Sweet Lord, I thought I love that song so much. I really do. And when I found out it was George Harrison, I thought, wow, it's so cool. So I did buy this album on vinyl when I had my little job at the social club in the early 80s. But I'm putting it in here because it's an important album to me, and it was made in the 70s. I didn't have the love affair with this album until like the 80s, but I knew some of the songs on it, and I really enjoyed them. And when I discovered it was George Harrison, I just fell in love with it even more. So it was quite important and influential album to me, because it also made my love and appreciation for the Beatles even stronger. So that's kind of like the early 70s. So then we're going to get to the bit now where it's my own taste and albums that really shone out to me. And the first one is going back to my jukebox days. But although this album, the song that I used to play on the jukebox isn't from it, but I'm talking about New Boots and Panties by Ian Dury and the Blockheads. So I've got it in this box set. I've got the CD, but can I put my hand on it? Can I? Hell. But I've got it in there. That's the cover of the album. And I just fell in love because he was so different. It's almost like he was speaking the words. I thought it's like Lou Reed, because Lou Reed almost sounded like he's sort of speaking. Lou Reed to me sounded like a cross between David Bowie and Bob Dylan a little bit. We weren't going to Dylan. Yeah, he drives sort of grates on me. But anyway, and it was almost like poems. It all rhymed and it was poetry, and it was just really, really cool. And it was like everyone was into the punk scene, and I just couldn't get into it. I could not get into the Sex Pistols. I could not get into the Clash. I just couldn't. Later in the years, in the early 80s, I got into some of the sort of more, I would say hardcore punk, but the other sort of punk bands, if you like, Subhumans, Crass, Flux of Pink Indians. I got into those sort of more alternative punk bands, if you like. I wasn't into the obvious punk bands. I've appreciated them now. I mean, because I love Public Image Limited, John Lydon's band. Sex Pistols. Yeah, I can appreciate what they were and what they did, and some of the songs I now really love. But at the time, I just couldn't get into them. But Ian Dury, yeah, man, he was cool. At this time, I was listening to things like Pink Floyd and stuff like that. I was evolving into. I thought I was going to go down that sort of prog route because I love Pink Floyd. I've got all their albums. Got 2 massive box sets of Pink Floyd. I will do a Pink Floyd video one day, but I just haven't got around to it yet. But I was into Pink Floyd, and that's because my friend at school, Simon Verco, he was really into Pink Floyd, and he got me into them. He lent me some of their albums. He lent me some Jimi Hendrix as well, which I couldn't really grasp. But I really enjoyed the Pink Floyd stuff. I had 2 best friends at school. I had three. I had Simon Verco, who liked Pink Floyd. I had Paul Clark, who liked Laurel and Hardy. And I had my other mate, John. And we both loved Adam and the Ants. And Dirk Wears White Socks, their debut album from 1979. Yes, what an album. This was me. This was me in a cupcake, if you like. You know, we went down, me and my friend, after school. We went down on our bikes to FL Moores on release day, and we went and bought Dirk Wears White Socks. And we bought some badges, amp music for amp people, and all these wonderful badges and stuff like this. I remember buying this, and I bought a 7-inch single on the same day called Young Parisians by Adam and the Ants. But this was incredible. Now we'd heard, you know, about him being sort of like something to do like ex sort of Sex Pistols in a way, but he always intrigued us. We loved the name Adam and the Ants. We said that is the coolest name in the world. I do have Adam and Ant tattoo somewhere. I don't know if you can see it. You probably can't pick it out, but yeah, it's just there. And I just fell in love with Adam and the Ants. They were our teenage sort of like early teen band. And they were just so different. This album is different to the other albums. Now, if you've got their other famous albums like Prince Charming, Kings of the Wild Frontier, this doesn't sound anything like those. This is pure post-punk. And it's really, really cool. There's a lot of really bizarre songs on there. I would class it along with bands like Wire, Magazine, Gang of Four. I would class them in the same sort of vein, this sort of album, rather than Amp Music or Prince Charming or Stand and Deliver. That is kind of withdrawn. That is them becoming big. They were Kings of the Wild Frontier that came out after this was huge, and it became so popular. So then they wanted to make number one. So they just kept releasing number one sort of hit tracks, which were really cool, really amazing. But this was the album that I fell in love with and played it to death. The track is The Man with the Egg on His Face. I absolutely loved. I loved Nine Planes Failed. Really cool. I'm going to listen to this album today. It's been ages since I've listened to this. This is a fantastic release from this. This does have the early singles on it, Xerox and Car Trouble, and it has the Car Trouble EP on there, as well as the original album. So this is such a cool album. Yes. Fell in love with Adam and the Ants. Well, mostly Dirk Wears White Socks, because I loved the new wave scene. But my new wave scene was there was one album that suddenly took over everything I was listening to at this point. I hadn't discovered Newman yet, but I had discovered Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures. Yes, I remember seeing this album cover everywhere. Everywhere I looked, it was just everywhere. And I didn't know what it was or who it was. I thought, is this a punk band? Because it was always in the punk section. When we used to go in my local record shop, they'd have different categories. You'd have country, western, rock, heavy metal, punk. You know, they didn't have goth then or anything like this, which this probably went on to influence the goth scene. But yes, this was always in the punk album. I thought I'm really intrigued by it. And when you turned it around, it always just had Joy Division, Unknown Pleasures. Never heard of them. Didn't hear nothing about Joy Division. But I bought this album 1 week. I think it must have been 1980. I must have bought this album. And it just dominated everything for me. So 1980 was the year I discovered Gary Newman, and I think because this isn't really electronic, but the way the instruments are played are almost like electronic. When you listen to the drummer, Stephen Morris, is it? He sounds like he's a drum machine. Do 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 He had such good timing to his drumming. It almost made it sound electronic, but it wasn't. They were a guitar band, you know, and they were incredible. And this album is amazing. I will be doing a Joy Division video soon. I'll go through my humble little collection of what I have by them. They only did 2 albums, obviously because of Ian, but we'll get onto that when we go through that video. But yes, Unknown Pleasures by Joy Division. What an album. Incredible. And then I discovered a German band called Kraftwerk, and they had this album called Man Machine, which you may remember it looking like that. And this is is it 74, 75 this album came out? I can't remember. 1978, so a little bit out. Yeah, and I heard this. The Model became a hit single in the UK, and it was really different, really cool. They sounded and looked like robots, and at this age, I was now, you know, getting to my sort of early teens and starting to feel alienated. I used to feel different to everybody else because everyone else was not into anything I liked. You know, my music taste had taken a direction down to these 2 albums, had taken a direction into a darker side with these 2 albums. And I heard this and it sounded alien-like. It sounded like made by machines. And it was like, okay, that's how I see the world. That's how I see people. They're like machines, they're like robots, just following each other. And I was different, but it attracted me to the music. And I just really liked the song. But there was a song on the B-side called Computer Love, which I preferred more. And I played it and played it and played it. So this was, I went and brought this album. It does have The Model on it, but it didn't have Computer Love. That was on Computer World. But yeah, fantastic. So I discovered them. So who am I going to discover from listening to that? Of course, Gary Newman. Pleasure Principle, 1979. I heard this first before Tube Army. I saw the cover of Cars, the single, in the shop, and I liked the cover. Do you remember? I think I might have told you this. I bought it because I liked the cover. He looked so like me in a way. It didn't look like me. It doesn't look like me, but he looked alienated. He looked different. He didn't look like he fitted in with anything or anyone. And that's how I felt. So I thought, oh, it's going to be really cool. And I took it home and I played it, but I accidentally played the B-side first, Asylum. And I just fell in love with that because that was like a horror film music. It was just so cool. It sounded like the sort of thing John Carpenter would do. Incredible. I didn't realise I put the wrong side on. I just thought, how's he released this as a single? You know, I've heard some instrumental stuff before, mostly from these guys, you know, but I'd never sort of like thought someone was going to release a single instrumental. And when I took the record off, I realised it was the wrong side. So I flipped it over and it was Cars, and I loved it. And so, of course, when I got paid as my little job, off I go, tumbled down to town and bought the Pleasure Principle, which didn't leave my turntable for about 4 months. I just played it over and over and over till I scratched it. I went out and bought it again. But when I bought it again, I bought Replicas, Tube Army. And then I went through the story of Gary Newman, like how I fell in love with his music. And I managed to go and see him in 1980, the year I discovered him. I was lucky to go and see him in that year. Like I said, the guy that, when my mum and dad worked, he bought tickets to go and see Gary Newman and said, can you take me? And I went with him, and it just blew my mind. And it just blew my mind. And that's where my love for concerts really came in. My love for concerts came in because of him. I'd been to concerts before him, 10cc, Dr. Feelgood. I was going to put Dr. Feelgood in here, but their album didn't really influence me in my taste in music. All these have. But this made me want to go and see Gary Newman every day if I could. I hadn't seen Bowie at this stage. But yeah, I was just in love with Gary Newman. And then I went to see him the next year at Wembley, his farewell tour and stuff like that. So I was so lucky. But yes, that's it, guys. They are 10 albums that have probably influenced my music taste and influenced my life. Because without these albums, I'll probably be a better person. No, without these albums, I wouldn't be the person I am today. Massive shout out to my lad. Cheers, guys.